Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Cimmerian September. This is a BookTube event created, of course, by Michael K. Vaughan, designed to celebrate Conan the Barbarian, the signature creation of Robert E. Howard, uh, in any way that you want to do, but the unofficial technical emphasis this time around is on Conan pastiche. Particularly, even if you want to be so daring, the Conan pastiche stuff done by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter decades ago. The famous run of mass market paperbacks that introduced Conan to such a wide audience that might not have known about him until the movie otherwise. You can go to those. Those muck around with Robert E. Howard and continue to muck around with Robert E. Howard and comment on how they're mucking around with Robert E. Howard until finally there isn't any more Robert E. Howard for them to muck around with, and then they just seamlessly blend into Conan fiction that is just L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. There's no Robert E. Howard involved at all. So it moves from, what is this volume? Conan the Freebooter, Conan the Usurper? What is this? How much of this is actually Robert E. Howard and how much of it isn't? If I don't have old issues of Weird Tales, how much of this is him and how much of it isn't? You move from that to later books in the series that are just L. Sprague de Camp, and that's all. And that can be a little dicey. That can get the blood pressure working, because a lot of Conan aficionados nowadays realize that this character is in fact immortal and deserves better than that. Yes, Robert E. Howard wrote these things at speed for the pulp market, but the original writings that he had, whether they are repetitive in parts, whether they're offensive in parts, they deserve better than that. The author should stand or fall on their own without the cleaning up, curating hand of even the most ardent fan. And that's true whether it's Robert E. Howard or Lester Dent or August Derleth or even H.P. Lovecraft. It's true for anybody. You shouldn't allow people to muck around with your work, and they shouldn't do it even if you aren't around to allow them. It's one of the only things when I read some of those L. Sprague de Camp books, and I'm thinking, all right, I've read the original Conan now many times, and I read these books like everybody else did at the time they were coming out, and I see what you're doing here, and I understand why you'd be doing it. I don't think it was done out of malice at all, but nevertheless, when I'm reading some of those books nowadays, I'm grateful for the hyper-litigiousness that Edgar Rice Burroughs displayed right from the very beginning. I swear, when the doctor slapped his bottom when he was born, he probably served him papers. So you, at the very least, you don't get somebody else's, some mega fan's cleaned up version of Tarzan and the Madman. At the very least, you don't get that. The book might go out of print. It might be printed only in a special edition by Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated, but it won't be someone else coming along, Lauren Esselman or whoever, and fixing it. We don't want to read fixed books at all. You don't fix it. Instead, you print it the way it was written, and if the public no longer has taste that suit it, the market will fix it. You won't have to do anything about it. And if it can't stand on its own, well, then it can't stand on its own. And should it stand at all, then, with your handiwork? But that's a pastiche discussion for another time. Once that initial run of L. Sprague de Camp books was done, we got clear and free Conan pastiche novels. Thankfully, there was none of this Dr. Watson and his battered tin dispatch box. There's none of this nonsense about, oh, wow, we found a manuscript. Oh, we found another manuscript. L. Sprague de Camp and Glenn Lord played that vein out as much as it could be played, and after that, it was just Conan pastiche fiction. And I've been reading a lot of that. I've been reading a lot of the Conan pastiche novels for Cimmerian September. And you might say, well, surely you haven't been reading a lot of them because there hasn't been a video every day. Yeah, I've been reading a lot of them, and most of the reading experiences I've been having were a lot like the one I gave you yesterday. A Conan pastiche novel that was a lot of hot air, that was not very good. That shouldn't surprise me. There's no magic formula here. Most Star Trek books are bad. That shouldn't surprise me. And that, again, informs probably the horrified visions of Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated that led them down a different path for marketing. I have a pretty thick skin for that sort of thing, and a lot of these Conan pastiche novels I've read already. A lot of them I read when they came out. Not the one I read by Leonard Carpenter, I don't think, but lots of others. Some of them I like a lot, but I've been a little bit worn down by the possibility that I'm going to throw a Conan pastiche novel onto the night's reading and it's going to stink. I have enough stinky books as it is on the night's reading. So last night, I went to a source for Conan that cannot disappoint. And it didn't disappoint at all. I went to the original Marvel Comics run of Conan the Barbarian, the 4-color comic book Conan the Barbarian, written by Roy Thomas, drawn by John Buscema. Drawn by John Buscema, sometimes with a lot of his attention, where he was paying a lot of attention to his layouts, and he was also inking his own work. He is by far his own best inker. Or art by John Buscema where it wouldn't be fair to say he's doing breakdowns, because he was too meticulous a craftsman for most of his career to feel right doing breakdowns. Which a breakdown would be a very rough sketch that you give of how a page is going to be laid out, and then you basically hand it to your inker, and they embellish it. They don't just ink your work; they fill it all in and clean it all up. But where Buscema was maybe overcommitted elsewhere, he was. I know it's unthinkable for the blue-haired activist little daffodils that draw comics for Marvel Comics today. But Buscema was drawing 3 or 4 books every month. not one book every other month, but 3 or 4 books every month. And a lot of them were really, really good, composition-wise, even in terms of finished panel work-wise. So maybe there were months where he didn't have complete attention to spare, and you would get in a craftsman of some kind to finish up his work. And that run, basically, aside from, the first year, where you had Barry Smith and you had Gil Kane and a couple of other people. Aside from that first year, it was basically Roy Thomas and John Buscema every month, month after month. That was incredible. I was aware at the time when I was getting these issues, I was aware that suddenly I couldn't 100% depend on the Fantastic Four. I couldn't 100% depend on the Justice League. But every month, I could 100% depend on Conan the Barbarian, that it would be really, really good. And I went back to those issues, those first 100 issues. We saw issue number 100 on Epic Comic Book Wednesday this week, but I went back to those 100 issues to cure what ails me for Conan pastiche, because this is Conan pastiche, of course. This is Conan pastiche. The thing that I want to look at today reflects a writing habit that Roy Thomas had. He was really good at writing comic books. I believe he was the best comic book writer of all time. And he could serve both the moods of comic book writing, whereas so many writers who were talented, a lot of really talented writers, Elliot Magan, Cary Bates, they could only serve one mood of a comic book reader, of a comic book reading experience, whereas Roy Thomas could serve both. The two are a one-and-done episodic issue. Introduce the reader to everything, craft it perfectly, tighten it down, make it great, give it a couple of fantastic moments, and then you're done. Roy Thomas could do that really, really well. But he liked to do multi-part stories. He liked very much the idea, a new idea to me anyway. When I was buying these things, I was hoping it was just a fad that would go away. It's never going to go away. Of a cliffhanger, where you introduce a story, but you're nowhere near done at the end of the issue. In fact, the hero looks like he's about to die, and so you have to buy the next issue. You not only have to buy the next issue, you have to eagerly wait for it. Roy Thomas liked to do stories like that, and that's what I went back to this time around. I went to Conan the Barbarian number 46 with this cover. The warrior and the wizard spawn Shockoth, a giant monster made of polished rocks. And you see how overblown this cover is. You're not going to be able to see it all because you can't see the original. It's got all this stuff on it. But this was the full moon, the bat against the moon, Conan is in chains, the monster is on top of him, etc., etc. It's the cowering girl in the background. Classic, just overburdened cover. And this is indeed a pastiche. a multi-part pastiche. Roy Thomas decided to just take his time and conjure this thing over many issues. So we're getting introduced to a story in this issue. But it's a Conan pastiche because Conan's name is on there and Conan is the main character. But this is not a pastiche of a Conan story. This is a pastiche of Kothar and the Conjurer's Curse by Gardner Fox, but a different barbarian altogether. Roy Thomas decided to adapt Gardner Fox's story, probably after a phone call with Gardner Fox, and dedicates the whole thing to him. So I don't know. I'm not down deep in the weeds of the comic book stuff. I'm not sure that anyone has ever written it down. So much of Marvel Comics history is being lost because the people involved in it are dying without writing memoirs. So I have no idea what Gardner Fox's response was. I'm assuming that he was flattered. I'm assuming that phone conversation had about a minute of him saying, in his querulous little voice, that why can't it be Kothar? I want it to be Kothar. And then probably Roy Thomas very politely telling him that Kothar is no Conan, which is something he heard often. And we start off the first issue of this run is with artwork by John Buscema, but the inking is by Joe Sinnott, who is a very tight, buttoned-down inker. I think he's very good on John Buscema. I think he's very good on anybody, unless your style is so wild that he is a poor match. He would be, for instance, a terrible inker on Gene Colan, where Gene Colan, in the mature nature of his artwork, wants to spill over the frame, wants to be a little bit indistinct. Gil Kane is actually a bad inker Joe Sinnott is actually a bad inker for Gil Kane as well. But if you've got somebody who's doing basic classic comic book artwork and maybe not polishing the edges, Joe Sinnott will come in there and do that. And the story finds Conan wandering in the wilderness. But he is not alone. Look at panels like this. He knows that something is watching him. Something is following him. Many somethings are following him. And they aren't human. And he is in this wilderness and he's willing to face these things, but it turns out when he turns to face them, they vanish. And instead, he is facing an unlikely sight. He is facing a portly magician. Murdo Raman the magician. There's a banquet all laid out there. Conan is deeply suspicious, but Murdo Raman has a mission for Conan. He wants Conan to take a mystical amulet. See, we get a cosmic cube view of it there. He wants Conan to take a mystic amulet to the city of Falkar and get it to the regent in the city, a man named Thamus Herklar. With a name like that, I don't know why you'd want to save him, but nevertheless, Murdo Raman does want to save him. He needs help because his rule is being threatened from within by two conniving wizards. There's Elvirium, and Thalcalides. They're anagrams, obviously. Gardner Fox was a nut for anagrams. I'm trying not to just unscramble them myself. I'm trying instead just to give them to you as they were. There's Elvirium and Thalcalides are these two magicians. They don't have any personalities other than that one is thin and one is fat. But they are conniving against famous Herklar, probably on the basis of his dumb name, which is also an anagram. And the wizard wants Conan to bring this amulet to the regent because it will help him out against supernatural forces. And Conan quite naturally asks him, why? Why would you ask me to do this? And for once, the wizard has a reason. He has been watching Conan from afar. And not just any Conan, he's been watching Conan's adventures. Conan adventures that we ourselves have seen. Here is Conan and the Frost Giant's daughter. That's a glimpse of how Buscema would have drawn it. And the wizard says that who else should I trust but a man who's not afraid to fight with both men at overwhelming odds and the gods themselves? Of course I should trust you. But he also tells him, Conan says, how do you intend to pay me? And Murdo Raman says, why, with your life, my good man. Deliver the amulet, and you shall live. Fail, and you shall die. And Conan, you would think, in a dumbly written Conan book, he would spring to his sword right away and try to kill the guy for an implied threat. But instead, Conan says, poor pay for a warrior. It's money I want. And the wizard says, oh, that, here you go, and throws him a bag of coins. And Conan briefly wonders, this is what I love about Roy Thomas's Conan, is that he gets the little details perfect. Perfectly right. Conan holds the bag of coins, is exactly what he wanted. And says, well, provided these coins aren't magic too, provided they don't disappear. And the wizard says, oh, they won't disappear, trust me. And Conan says, I take no man's word that has not stood beside me in battle. And that's, believe it or not, going to become important later on, 4 issues from now, 4 months from now. Conan rides on. He rides to a city on the outskirts of Falkar, and he finds a young woman who the crowd is getting ready to burn to death. Because she is an intimate of yet another sorcerer, Zolcanar, with a Q. Her name is Stefania. Or is it? Her name is Stefania, and she is the young assistant of this wizard. And they are going to burn her because they've already tried to kill him, and she's his assistant. They're blaming him for everything that's wrong with the village, and she's trying to point out to them, no, you were all here. He saved the village. He mystically made the crops grow when the caravans were late. He made it rain when there was a drought. What are you talking about? He's your friend. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They're intent on burning her until Conan shows up. And it doesn't take him long. They are a hayseed rabble. It doesn't take him long to destroy them completely. And here you can see the difference that you get in the 4-color Conan comic book versus the black and white Savage Sword of Conan. Here, he's ripping this man's shirt. And look what he's doing there. Look at that. To put it mildly, that would not look that way if that panel were done in Savage Sword of Conan. Probably he would just be bisected and we'd get a little bit of gore anyway. But they don't have any stomach for fighting Conan. So he frees this young woman and takes her with him. They ride out of town. And she wants to get to Zolcanar's headquarters. She wants to go to his hidden castle. And Conan says, well, from the sound of that crowd, they must be dead. And she says, he's not dead. And he says, how do you know? And she says, because there's a spell connecting the two of us. And if he dies, I die. And I'm still alive. So he must be still alive. And she shows a lot of fire, Stefania does. And Conan rather likes that. He says, I'll never turn my back on you, and I'll sleep with both eyes open, but by Crom, I like you. You will not see that panel in a modern adaptation of Conan in a comic book. You just won't. Mostly because the writers, no matter how much they profess to love him, do not understand him. Not the way Howard wrote him. I believe that Roy Thomas understands him perfectly well. I've already caused my share of controversy on Cimmerian September, so I don't want to stress my utterly heretical belief that Roy Thomas is a better writer of Conan than Robert E. Howard is. I won't stress that. Instead, we get these really tight paneled pages. I mean, we tend to think of Buscema as a big, operatic comic book artist, but he could do these really tight panels really well. So that individual panels can be a work of art. Look at this thing. Try to imagine this panel without any words on it. One of the great things about Buscema's artwork is that for 9/10 of the story, you don't need any words. He even puts the toadstools climbing up the tree. That is just lovely. That is just wonderfully done. We think of him as a big, dramatic artist, but not always. And they actually do find the remains of Zolcanar's headquarters. Notice by now, they're playful. Conan has already told her, I have no interest in a girl who doesn't want me. So she knows she has nothing to worry about, and she says, he says, so enough of being morose, my fine wench, there's no profit in it. And she says, yes, my big, gallant, black-maned bear. And he says, that's more like it, I think. That's very good. That's very good. That's much more. I know it might strike you as odd. It doesn't happen in the Schwarzenegger version of Conan. It doesn't happen in most Conan adaptations, but that element is present. That element, Conan is a figure of not only gigantic melancholies, but gigantic mirths. Most writers tend to forget that and make him just a grim, avenging barbarian. Roy Thomas almost never does. And they encounter something in the wizard's home. Him encounters Shockoth, this giant stone-forged demon. Note the headdress. Note the strange headdress. I don't know how many of you are old black and white movie buffs. I could be wrong. I don't know. Buscema has never done a biography. He's never done many interviews. I have a strong suspicion that you are supposed to see hints of the Gollum character here. That's essentially what this thing is. An animated piece of inanimate matter. But that headdress, I like it. I really do. And here's more what we think of from Buscema. Big panels. But he can do both. Here, the action sequence with this monster is look at how tightly that's done. That's, what, 10 panels? 9 panels? That's incredible. Especially when you consider how good each individual panel is. Look at that. In a modern-day comic, there would be no backgrounds there. There would be no cowering girl in the corner. There would be no shadow up there in the corner. There wouldn't be anything like that. It wouldn't have a background at all. It looks hopeless until Conan realizes that the acids that have spilled on the floor are dissolving this thing. And so he decides to throw some acid at it, to the joy of science lab nerds in high school everywhere. It actually works. And he destroys the monster that way, because he could not have beaten it otherwise. But what do they discover inside the magician's lair? The magician, Sokanar. And sure enough, he is alive. He's in some sort of weird suspended animation, but he's not dead. So Stefania was right. Here we have house ads for the origin of Marvel Comics. Isn't that great? I just recently found a paperback of this, and I need not have worried, because I think it's Gallery is coming out with a deluxe hardcover reprint for the 50th anniversary of this next month. So I could have just requested it instead of spending $5 on it at the Brattle. We move on to the next chapter in the story. A fantastic Gil Kane cover. Will you look at that Gil Kane cover? Oh my God. The Goblins strike at midnight. And we have changed our inkers. This is Dan Atkins, I believe. Yeah, this is Dan Atkins. We've changed our inkers. So we have, things are a little bit sketchier, probably scratchier. Probably not so as you could tell. And still, Conan and Stefania are having words. She is not just politely yielding to him. And he's as good as his word. When they've been riding for a long time and they're really tired, he puts her to bed. Doesn't take advantage of her. He puts her to bed. And they are attacked by bloodless goblin creatures. Conan keeps bisecting them, but they don't bleed. And it turns out that it's only a few pages in this issue, because we get a backup feature. Stan Lee writing a story of medieval warfare drawn by the great Wally Wood. How incredible is that? It's just amazing. Very nearly upstaged Conan the Barbarian, because it doesn't get any better than, I mean, look at this. It doesn't get any better than Stan Lee and Wally Wood. I mean, really. And yes, indeed. We also get a pinup by, who is this? Tim Conrad. I don't know that name. He decided to give us a teenage Conan as a young super hottie. Brooding and presumably chilly. Then we move on to the next issue. And I believe we have changed colors again. Yeah. It's still John Buscema who's doing the artwork, but now, and Atkins still has a credit, but it's Dick Giordano who's doing the inking and a lot of the finishing here. As we get another great Gil Kane cover. Classic example of how Gil Kane would over-egg the pudding. Here you've got Conan fighting against impossible odds. The classic Gil Kane sequence, a little Gil Kane gimmick of having a character in the forefront of a comic issue, a cover usually, who is looking over his shoulder at you, the viewer, to draw you into the action. Conan is hacking and slashing on this hooded death in the background. You calm down a little, Gil. But while they're riding, they're bringing They've got a travois set up, and they're bringing Zokanar along with them. They're not going to leave his body in the ruins of his castle. They're bringing him along because they're hoping that once they get to Falkar, they'll get some sort of cure for him. And while they're walking, Conan tells Stefania a story of his extreme youth when he was a boy in the snow in Cimmerian, when he encountered a woman in mystical control of polar bears, which would make her pretty damn frightening. Her name is Ursula, and she is a witch woman, lives alone, controls a certain kind of animal, bears in this case, and she greets Conan, who is very young, and he is amazed. She tells him her story, gives him a good meal, and then, I don't know how else to read this sequence other than she takes his virginity. Conan's extreme youth is not as extensively chronicled as maybe I would like, but this is right before he goes to the siege of Venarium, and I don't think there's much doubt there as to what happens. He has fond memories of her, I would think. The bears let him go. They don't eat him. And he's just telling that story to Stefania as they set up camp. And she tells a story in return about how she was given to Zokanar, and she has an odd birthmark. This is another thing that Roy Thomas loved, and that she doesn't really know anything about her background. They meet a ruffian, and he temporarily turns the tables on Conan and stakes him out for the rats in the mountains. He's going to be rescued, but before we get to there, last issue we had a backup story, Stan Lee writing and Wally Wood illustrating. In this issue, we also have a backup story, and it's John Buscema drawing Red Sonja. No offense at all to Jim Thorne, but that is just incredible to have John Buscema drawing this character is just amazing. But anyway, we move on. Less effective Gil Kane cover here, and here Conan is. And he is rescued and saved in the mountains by another witch woman, Lupulina, who knows Ursula very well. She doesn't go into great detail, but it's one of the great things about this story is that there's obviously some sort of sisterhood of female sorcerers, each of whom are in sync somehow with a kind of animal. And you want more of that, but you don't get it. One thing you do notice, though, a slight difference between Lupulina and Stefania. She meets Conan, and they run through the jungle together, through the forest. She doesn't need him to slow down for her at all. And she throws him his sword the next morning because they are going to go into the city. And so they do. They attack without any war cry. The brigand who turned the tables on Conan has kidnapped Stefania. They have to get her back. And they attack his train, even though it's large, without any fear at all. She has control over wolves. She has her sling, and she has Conan. So they actually prevail. And they go to the city, where once again, she proves her worth. She is fighting alongside Conan. It reminds you of that quote, "I take no man's word that has not stood beside me in battle." Lupulina is see, this is what I mean. You've got tons of panels on this page, but this, that is really good. That is just a tiny little panel, but that is really good. I would have to wedge it against the screen if I were barbarically showing you it on paper, but I'm not. We reach Stefania, and we reach a poor serving wench. There's a serving wench in the palace. I always want to yell at Roy Thomas's serving wenches. These serving wenches in palaces. I always want to yell at them. He has a monster in mind, and he has a horrible end in mind. And you, my dear, are the dinner. You are the main event, because the female co-star that we've had all this time is not going to die. The wolf sorceress is not going to die, and Conan's not going to die. That means you're the red shirt here. And sure enough, there's a monster who no sooner shows up than in the next issue, another bad Gil Kane cover. The monster no sooner shows up than the servant girl bites it, or rather, it bites her. This is all a bit of falderall. As Stefania is rescued, they get away from this monster thanks to the digestive properties of the servant girl. And Lupulina meets Stefania, but she calls her Chrysala because she's a dead ringer for her mother. Shares her mother's birthmark. Her mother was a woman named Chrysala. And when Lupulina was just a powerful sorceress and had not yet allied with wolves, her name was Samandra, and she lived in Falcar and was a lady in waiting to Stefania's mother, and wonders if Stefania is also part of this mystic sisterhood. So we get a lot of exposition. Our heroes have temporarily staved off disaster, and this is another. I want to show you this. Here we have servants bringing in food. Great Roman-esque period chairs, stuff piled against brickwork. There's a giant fireplace. They're all by the table. Just incredible detail, packed into a panel so small. Samandra, or Lupulina, tells the story of how how she affected the savior of the little girl from these two conniving sorcerers. Let's try their names again. Elvirium and Thalcalides. Elvirium and Thalcalides. She saves the girl and brings her to Zokanar, the sorcerer. See, here are two evil sorcerers. I believe this is the first panel where we get the both of them together. They are evil and conniving, and oh, hang on a second here. I just mocked printed paper, and I accidentally turned the brightness down, which wouldn't have happened. You wouldn't have to worry about the brightness level on printed paper. But we fixed it in 2 seconds. She continues to tell the story about how these two wizards have imprisoned Themis Herclar and are going to kill him. They certainly run the city. And at one point, she decides to use her sorcerer's abilities to conjure up the faces of these two sorcerers. And she does it by casting around for the nadir, the pinnacle of evil in Falcar. And the face that shows up in her crystal ball is neither, what was it again? Ilvirium or Thalcalides. It's not either one of them. It's this guy. Who the heck is that? Talons of the Ape Lords. It is neither. Then a greater foe has arisen in Falcar than any I have dreamed of. And the next scene is us seeing that figure. There is a figure on the throne of Falcar. It's not the regent, but it's not either one of these wizards either. They call it, and notice how Buscema draws him. Almost no lines on the face, almost no features at all. A very interesting way of connoting his evil. It turns out that he has weird eye beams. They dissolve you slowly. So they strip the flesh, then the bones, then dust. And it turns out that these two sorcerers have him in their thrall. He's on the throne, but he's their puppet. And we learn gradually about him. His name is Unos. And he is not human. They created him in a vat. They created him in a laboratory. And he was infused with life by two demons. I think I'm a little bit sketchy on exactly Unos's paternity. Was he born of two demons, the two demons that we're going to meet, who claim to be his mother and father? Or was he created in a vat? Or some combination of the two? I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure which it is. But we go to issue number 51 with a great Gil Kane cover. Oh my God. 25 cents? I'd have paid 25 cents just for that cover. Not for anything else. My God, how incredible. And we have changed here to just Dick Giordano. Dick Atkins is gone. We're just Dick Giordano. Very fine work. He takes Buscema's penchant for heavy, thick lines and thins them out. And it really works. It doesn't always work when everybody does that, but it really works when he does it. And here we have Conan just striding as bold as you please into the court of Unos with a weird oddity that he is sure Unos is going to want to see. It's a bird with an eye in the middle of its forehead. And according to Conan, he tells Unos, who again has very little in the way of facial features, no hand details either, he's just plain unsculpted flesh. Very eerie way to do it. He describes, he says that the bird can tell the future, and that the bird can prophesy. And the bird says, not only is Stefania alive, which no one in the kingdom knew, she is the rightful heir, but also that the two sorcerers are plotting against him. And he doesn't like hearing that at all. Which one is this? Thalcalides says, stop that man, make him your prisoner, I command you. And he has to be reminded, I am regent here, Thalcalides. The man goes free because his bird has opened my eyes to the truth. But that doesn't mean that Unos is a good guy at all. It turns out the bird was Lupulina. She was just sorcerously changing shape. And she... she conjures up a scene at the palace that they're not there to see, where Unos's parents show up. They don't look evenly matched. One is a glowing pair of eyes, the other is a green woman with pink hair. And they talk to him a bit. They say to him, why are you his slave? Why are you the slave of these two men? And he says, they can dispose of me easily as I might crush an ant beneath my own heel. And they say, you have powers, my son. And he says, aye, but what are mine against theirs? They know conjurations to summon up such devils as Azthamar of the 100 Hells, which sounds very, very intimidating, but his parents are not impressed. Bah, Azthamar, that impish upstart, he is nothing compared to Belthamaquar, father of demons. To you, says Unos, but to me? He says, yes, I think perhaps we shall help you, my son, this once, and once alone, and the hour of our help has already come, because the two wizards burst into the room, and they don't fare well. One of them is turned into pure water, and the other, look at that, how incredible, the other is turned into a giant frog, because he croaks too much. And they disappear. They have helped Unos to escape from these two horrible sorcerers. And what does he do with the woman who brought him the truth? What does he do with Samandra, Lupulina? Kills her. Stabs her in the back. And Conan doesn't know this. He has fled the city with Stefania. They are out. They have gone back to what's his name? Zokanar? Stiff as a board, the guy who's in a coma. They go back to his body, hoping that maybe they can do something with him. And they are riding hot on their heels is Unos himself, who wants to kill them. He wants to take Stefania for his own, but he wants to kill Conan. And sure enough, we see his eye beams. They reduce Conan to muscle and then bone, but then Conan comes back. Why? Is it the amulet, which everyone has forgotten about, but which he is still wearing? Unos doesn't have any explanation for this, so he uses some minor abilities. Telekinesis, basically, the Force. He throws rocks at Conan. He has vines ensnare him. And he tries to kill, he wants to kill Zokanar. So he uses his evil eye beams on Zokanar, knowing that the spell might kill Stefania as well. But while he's doing that, Conan has ripped his way free by main force. He might be facing a sorcerer, but he's not facing sorcery. He's been hampered by physical means. And he grabs Unos. Just grabs him and crushes him. But it's the thing that allows him to do it is the amulet. The amulet has burned a hole in his chest. But but again, it's Roy Thomas's understanding of Conan. Not every man would have done that. Not every man would have had the courage. Conan didn't know that would happen. But it turns out the girl is alive. It turns out that Zokanar is dead, but the spell did not kill her. And she is the rightful heir of Falkar. She must go back and rule. And Conan, it's a very wonderful exchange. Again, an 8 or 9 page panel. But it's a very wonderful exchange. He says, she says that the pain she felt is fading. And he says, you'll forget it when you rule in Alcarion. And she says, rule? Oh, Conan, I know nothing about such things. Come with me. Help me rule wisely and well. And he says, no, that's not for me. Well, he is going to rule a kingdom on his own in 30 years. You'll do all right as long as you remember what it's like to be on the other side of the scepter. And she says, I'll try. And he says, one more thing I'd ask you. And she says, anything. And he says something that we are expecting, because we all heard him say issues ago, I take no man's word that has not stood beside me in battle. He says, when you bury Samandra, say a prayer over her as well for Conan of Cimmeria. Light the candles to any gods you wish. Just say I'll meet her again when I pass through the horned gates of dream. Lovely. Now, I don't know how much of this is taken from Kothar and the Conjurer's Curse. The horned gates of dream sounds like it probably does come from that book. I don't know that that's a line that Roy Thomas would have put in Conan's mouth. But he sends this poor girl, she's sad, she likes Conan. He sends her back to rule on her own. The two wizards are dead. Lupulina is dead, but presumably the people will accept her. And he rides on his way. His final words are not for her. You can tell that he doesn't really think that much about her. But Lupulina, Samandra, who stood beside him in battle, who fought her way into the stronghold with him, he does think about her. And that's wonderful. That's exactly what Conan would do. It's exactly right as a characterization of this figure. And there you go. See, so that was a little saga embedded in Conan the Barbarian. This story of Conan interfering, being drawn into a war of wizards and a fight for the seat of power in a city. And then he rides on. It wasn't one issue, but at the end of this 4-issue story, Conan is free to have another adventure. Clean slate. Nothing pulling on him at all. And that does happen in the next issue. This is number 51. It's not long after this that Baylit is introduced. And that gives Roy Thomas a chance to have not only an ongoing storyline, but a different cast. A regular cast, which he loved. He was a multi-cast writer when he wanted to be. Much more so, he much preferred that to writing one character over and over again. And there you go. I went to this for Cimmerian September because these issues of Conan never let me down. They never let me down, and these didn't. So I'm gonna wrap this up. I'm gonna resist the urge to do this again. To do this again tonight. I don't want to just resort to comic books, even though my original idea for Cimmerian September is that I would just read the first 100 issues of Marvel's Conan the Barbarian. There are plenty of books out there. I should read some of them, so I will probably do one of those tonight, for good or ill. But anyway, sorry about the length of this video. I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.